Hello everyone, my name is Austin Shaner, and welcome back to my channel. In the last video, I asked you all to send in requests for what you would like to have featured on my channel, because ultimately I want this channel to be focused on helping you guys achieve what you want to do in Fusion 360. And no doubt, a bunch of you reached out to me with various ideas or projects you've been struggling with. So first of all, thank you all for sending in those requests. I will get to as many of them as possible, and if I don't feature a specific video structured around what you requested, I will then also make sure to include that information in future videos if it's pertaining to whatever topic I'm talking about. So today's topic comes from Vincent, and here's what he said. Hi Austin, thank you so much for your willingness to help. I'm very impressed with your work. Thank you, Vincent. This is the heel I'm trying to make, but couldn't with your method. I'm new to Fusion 360, and any help would be much appreciated. Well, first of all, thank you for the request, Vincent. I really appreciate it, and thank you for talking with me over the past week or so. You have been great to work with, and I'm proud to show you the results we came up with. Okay, so jumping into Fusion, let's talk about what makes this heel transition so difficult to model. Well, actually, let's start with a headstock, for example. So on a headstock, right, you've got a smooth contour that's supposed to meet on both sides, right? So it's supposed to be perfectly seamless all the way around. Well, on a heel transition, actually, at least one with this kind of a horn style, there's an intentional seam there, which changes our approach a little bit, right? So you kind of come to a sharp point up here at the top, and then you need that sharp point to transition into a perfect curve. Right, so this line right here is going to taper down until there's nothing left on it. And so that actually changes our approach a little bit. It's still going to be very similar to how I modeled a headstock in my perfect headstock transition video, but we're going to change some of the way we use the helper surfaces to allow us to accommodate that varying curvature. Okay, so jumping into the design workspace, let's go ahead and take a look at some of the fundamental sketches you're going to need in order to get this design off the ground. So I'm going to drag my timeline back to before these three sketches, because at that point I have basically modeled my headstock and my neck up until the point of where I want the transition into the heel to start. So let me hide the bodies. So you need your fretboard sketch. So that way it gives you a grid, and you can pick basically which frets you'd like your transitions to start on. You're going to want your headstock sketch, and even though we're not going to be modeling the headstock today, it does play an important role in determining some of the angles and where things fall. So go ahead and model your entire side profile sketch as well. So that includes the depth of the horn. So that's going to play an important role later, because we're not going to define that at any other point. So I defined it as covering these two frets, but if you didn't want it to fall directly on a fret, you can totally do that. You would just give this, a dimension here of whatever you'd like it to be. And then you will want to make sure you have your neck profile determined up until the part of where you want the transition to start. And doing all that, you should be able to model your headstock and your neck up until that point. One really important note is when you loft your neck, make sure it's two separate surfaces. Now I know it's not ideal to have it two separate surfaces, but this definitely helps us establish the curvature for the heel transition. So just like in my headstock video where I did it in two halves, go ahead and do your neck in two halves as well, because we will be using this surface right here to establish our curvature. So make sure it's two portions. Or two segments rather. Okay, so let's go ahead and get some of our remaining sketches in place, and let's go and do this transition. So I'm going to create a plane at angle on the back here, and I'm going to do 90 degrees. Now you could do it this way, or you can do an offset plane. Either one is totally fine. I do prefer to draw my plane on the back of the transition rather than the fret, because at any point if I decide, no, I want this transition to start, or not start, end a little bit further up or a little bit further back, it still stays with the sketch with the side profile sketch rather than the fret. It's not locked to that fret. So go ahead and hit OK. And then sketch on that plane. And so now we need to define what the back side where the heel transition interfaces with the guitar looks like. So let's project in, since we're on the fret, let's go ahead and project in this fret. And let's project in this point as from the construction line that gives us our taper of the neck. So at this point, the neck is like 0.6 inches or whatever you decide the thickness to be at the headstock transition. And then up here, it's going to be obviously be taller. So this just projects that, that taper all the way back to this surface. So that way, when we create our neck profile at that fret, it's still accurate. So let's go create arc here, here. And now we're maintaining the two separate segment portions even on the back here. It's probably not necessary, but I try to be consistent. So, and then make these two equal. So we made these two tangent and equal. So that way it automatically defines it for us. We don't need to give any dimensions. Now, obviously, if you're using a different shape of neck, then you would just give it whatever dimensions you desire. And then let's go ahead and make these construction lines because they're just going to help us get some of the dimensions in place. Now let's draw a line up here. And we're going to make it midpoint to the top of our transition. And then we're just going to define what is that dimension. So how wide do we want that little horn to be? So I'm going to type 1 inch, but it can be whatever you'd like. And then all we need to do now is just create, let's hide our bodies, get those out of the way. All we need to do now is just create an arc from this point to this point. Now you can do it in two separate arcs and that works just fine because all we're going to be using these for is rails for a loft. So it doesn't matter if your arc looks something like this, right? If you want to have like a curve that swoops up. But I find that this works the best. So just create an arc here, and then you want it to be tangent to your neck profile. Let's see. Yep, it didn't apply tangent. So select these two and make those tangent. That should automatically lock it in place. Make sure it's not a construction line. Go create arc, that, and there we go. So that defines the back side of our heel transition. And now that gives us all the information we need. So we have 3 points here. Now we have all the information we need to go ahead and draw the horn. So let's close this sketch and we're going to create a new plane at angle right here. We'll do 90 degrees on that one as well. And let's go ahead and sketch on that plane and create our horn. So let's bring in these 3 points. And then what we're going to do is we're going to draw a little arc or a little square. Now you don't have to do this, but you'll see why I'm doing it in a moment. And let's make these horizontal. And let's make this midpoint to that projected line. Make that vertical. Okay. So now we need to do is create 2 arcs. An arc here and an arc here. And you don't necessarily have to make this come tangent to this line. I chose to, so that way when it hits the back, that wall of the body of the guitar, it's coming perpendicular to it. But you don't have to do that. But if you want to follow along, go ahead and do that. So let's make those tangent. And then let's go ahead and give ourselves, let's just project in that line so we close off the sketch. I don't think that's actually necessary, but that's fine. Okay. So now we have the fundamental sketches, but now we need to go ahead and create some helper surfaces. So let's go back to this sketch real quick, because what we need to do is we need to create a new helper line or helper arc, just like we did on this neck profile, but here. So let's go back to that sketch. And let's create a 3-point arc. And then let's make these two concentric. And then you just either need to define a height or you need to constrain where this point lands somehow. So I just go like this and make it vertical to that. And I did that. Whatever you choose to do, just do it consistently all the way down the neck whenever you create these little helper arcs. And so that's all we need for that one. And then on this one, let's go back. So we need an arc that comes from here out, and we need one that comes from here back. So let's go and create arc from this point and this point. And let's make these concentric and these concentric. And now we just need to define where those points are going to land as well. And again, the reason why we're doing this is, we could just draw a straight line coming out from here, let's say that's tangent to here. So if we did that, that would totally be fine. But what that means is that we would end up using a tangency constraint when we loft our helper surfaces rather than a curvature constraint. So this is kind of the difference between tangent and curvature, right? So at this point, it comes tangent, and that it would theoretically go straight back. But if it maintains the same rate of curvature, then that arc would actually keep going. And so oftentimes they look very similar, but there might be slight differences in the surface that would change that. So let's go ahead and make that line up with our fretboard. So let's project that in. Let's make that a construction line, and then make these coincident. So that locks that in place. Because the reason I did that is because it's going to end up lofting down to a point that's on the fretboard anyway. And so it kind of keeps it in line with that, so I don't get any extra twisting. And then this one, we can just go ahead and either dimension it to, let's say, this fretboard, or we can just give it a dimension. I'm just going to go ahead and project in this fret line, make that a construction line, and make these coincident. So that way it locks that in place. And then one small little tiny sketch that we need is just create a sketch on the fretboard plane. And we need to create a little line. Let's project in this point. We need to create a little line right here. And let's project in this point and make these coincident. Now, the point of this is because at the base of the fretboard, the heel transition would keep going back in a straight line at this point. At the top here, it maintains the same rate of curvature as the horn, but at the base, it actually follows the fretboard. And so we needed a curved line here and a straight line here. So we're going to end up lofting between a curved line and that straight line. So that way, essentially, we're telling the patch tool that we're going to be using later, this is what that surface would look like if it kept going. So hit finish. And now we have everything we need to go ahead and create our helper surfaces. So let's go to the Surface tab, create Loft. Then you're just going to loft between these two. And create a rail here. Sorry, my bodies aren't showing. That's why I didn't show up. So we need that one. And let's go create loft again between this line and this line. And then we want to use a rail. We want that rail to be this line right here. So it's transitioning from a curve to a straight line, but following that path. Let's bring back our sketches one more time and go create one more loft from here. But in this case, we're not going to select this line. We're going to select the surface line. And then as for a rail, we're going to choose this line and this line, or whatever arc you created for that transition. And then on the surface profile, so you can see on this profile, we don't have any tangency or curvature constraints. but on this neck we do. So let's go ahead and change that to curvature. You can see that it slightly changes. It slightly changes the shape, but that's good because that means that at this point it's going to be exactly the same shape. So hit OK. And so that's kind of a big difference from what we did with the headstock, because in the headstock, for example, if I undo that last loft, in the headstock we extruded this out. But that was because it maintained the same rate of curvature going up. But in this case, it doesn't. It's changing from like a really large radius to a very fine point. And when I tried doing it this way, it kind of worked, but it ended up giving me some weird humps and dips in the patch tool. And as soon as I figured out that actually I should be lofting that, it worked out great. Okay. So now we can go ahead and do our first half of the heel. So let's hide our sketches and let's go create patch. Select all 4 of these lines and change all of them to curvature. Bring back our sketches and just select that line to close it off and hit OK. So we did a bunch of work up front to make that process very simple. And that was kind of the point. So let's delete these 3 surfaces. I can actually select them. And then mirror this over because this is a symmetrical design. Now, if it's not symmetrical, you'd end up creating 2 sets of helper surfaces, one for each side of the transition, and then you would patch them and stitch them together. So let's go create mirror plane here. Hit OK. And so now we've got our headstock, our volute or headstock transition, our neck, and the heel transition basically mapped out. All we need to do now is patch up the boundaries. So let's go create patch, bring up our sketches. We're going to patch that line or that surface. We're going to patch that and that. Hit OK. And let's go ahead and stitch all these together. Make sure we've got no red lines. Nope, we're good. Okay. So there's our transition. Now let's take a look at what we have. So we have a seamless transition between these 4 points, which is good. We don't see any pits or dimples or creases or anything. But we do know, because we made it come to a sharp point, that it's going to slightly crease itself on its way up the transition. That's exactly what we want in this case. Now, you'll notice I didn't give this a radius because if I drew the radius in, then that would drastically change the curvature that we wanted, right? So this loft, right, that would end up being a really tiny little arc right here. But we actually needed that to follow the curvature of the main arc, not the fillet, let's say. And so I went ahead and did it as a straight point. And now we can just use a fillet of, let's say, 0.031, 3/32 of an inch, or sorry, 1/32 of an inch, just to kind of soften that edge. You can make it larger, but with this approach, there's one caveat, and that's if with this fillet, you can see that it starts to taper that surface back. So let's go. You can see how this is completely vertical right now, but if I applied like a 3/8 of an inch, it starts to taper that surface back. Now, if you're totally fine with that, no problem. If you want to maintain, let's go and do this. So let's just delete this. If you want to maintain that all the way up, that vertical, but still have a large radius, then you're going to need to draw it in. And then you might have to adjust your patch tool a little bit, or some of your helper surfaces. I wasn't able to get that working, so I highly recommend you do it this way. Wink, wink, but I think it'll be fine. So let's go ahead and do 1/32 of an inch just to soften that edge a little bit. And let's take a look at the curvature. So let's do zebra analysis. So we've got a pretty nice transition coming from these surfaces. And we do see that it starts to crease on its way up, and that's what we expected. We do have slight imperfections in this back corner, it looks like. You can see it starting to spike a little bit. But otherwise, everything else looks pretty flawless, and actually you can kind of see it in the reflections here, but it is so faint that I wouldn't be worried about that at all. That's going to be, you'll never see that in wood when you cut it. So I'm pretty happy with that. Now, before we go any further, let's go ahead and try to change our design and see if we maintained our parametric constraints. So let's go ahead and change the width of this transition. Let's do like 0.375. Something pretty narrow. And you'll see that we actually maintained that entire transition. It's looking really nice. There's no major dips or creases or anything other than obviously this one. Now let's go back and let's do something wider. Let's do like 2 inches. Now, because we didn't, because of the way we drew the arc, we didn't make a tangency constraint or making it perpendicular. So it ended up arcing out, but that's fine. If you're going to do something that wide anyway, you might have to adjust. So we did break it actually at this point, but I think that's because it went beyond the width of my neck. So let me try changing this just a little bit smaller. Let's do like 1.75. No. Okay, so we did break something. Let's go back a couple times. Let's try 1.5. Now that works. And go back again. Let's try 2. And 2 inches works there. For some reason, I think as I was coming from 0.375 up to 2 inches, it didn't like that. But when I went from my 1 inch to 2 inches, it was just fine. So let's hide our sketches and take a look here. So same concept. We've got a crease that slowly fades in, and everything's actually looking quite good. So I'm pretty happy with that. So let's go back to our 1 inch. And last thing we need to do is we need to get in our dovetail for where it meets the body. So let's go ahead and sketch on this back surface. Now it doesn't have to be a dovetail, you know, it can be a tenon or anything like that, it's fine. I'm choosing to use a dovetail in this case. So let's project in this bottom line. And then we're going to go create line up like this. And then create a 3-point arc between these two and make those tangent. And then let's draw a construction line from here to here so that way it becomes vertical. And then we just define this radius right here. So let's do 0.75 inches. Actually, that's 0.375 would make it 0.75. Yeah, there we go. And then how far up do we want it to go? So I'm going to dimension from here to here. Let's do 3 inches. Okay. And now we can extrude that out we don't have to do any surface modeling. We can just extrude that out by whatever depth you'd like it to go into the body. So I'm going to do 0.75. And then this might be fine as is, but if you'd like to add a dovetail, I can show you a really quick and easy way to do that. So you sketch on this bottom surface. Let's hide some of these other sketches. And let's go create lines. So we're going to draw the portion we'd like to cut away. And let's make this points coincident, these points coincident. Make that vertical, and let's define our angle. So if you wanted like a 15-degree dovetail, that would be 7.5 in each direction. So let's go 7.5 degrees. And then you can take this sketch and you can just go create for solid, create sweep, and you can use this path right here as the path for it. Hit OK, and now you've got your dovetail. And so the only thing really remaining to do is maybe the little heel cap. So we can go create new component, hit OK, and then we can sketch on this surface. So whatever this surface ends up being, as long as it's not a sharp point, as long as you did apply a fillet, this will work. And project in that geometry, and we can just extrude that up by whatever thickness you want that cap to be. So I'm just going to do 0.125. And then we can apply a fillet to that. We'll do the same as the one above, or as the one on the front here. And then let's go ahead and apply some appearances. So I'm going to do that, and I kind of created a little an ivory color. And let's go to render. And we are now officially back to where we started. So I am actually really happy with how that turned out. I went through a bunch of different iterations over the past week, and it is still quite tricky, and I haven't quite nailed, as you saw, some of the parametric constraints because, and I think it has to do with because this comes to a sharp point and then I'm creating a fillet. And so those two, whatever the combination of those two end up being, so the width and the fillet here, I think sometimes it might break it. So I am still going to be working when I get an opportunity to develop that a little bit further and see if I can really nail the parametric side of this. But otherwise, I'm really happy with the actual surface results we got. And it is still fairly parametric. You just can't go too extreme with it. So thank you for joining me on this episode. I hope this was helpful. Again, as always, if you guys have any questions, leave me some comments down below and I will do my best to answer them. I try to answer every comment that I can. And if you guys have if you want to have your video featured on my channel, I do have a Discord link and an email in the About section of my channel. It's also going to be in the links below. And feel free to send me some ideas or something that you're struggling with. And we might just create a video just like this for your idea. So thank you all for joining me. I appreciate it and have a good night.